Hi. In this final lecture on growth models, what I want to do is I want to return to that question that really motivated the whole section, which is why are some countries really successful and why aren't others? Now, to get some understanding of that with the help of our model, we've got to go back and just remind ourselves of what's in our model, right? What it can explain and what it can't. So it's got labor, it's got capital, it's got technology, and those combine to produce output, right? And we've got this nice sort of just pretty straightforward equation that describes how output depends on those other factors. And then we included things like savings and depreciation, and that gave us, these growth rates, and we saw how innovation was incredibly important in terms of continuing to drive growth. Now notice what's not in here. There's no inequality in this model, there's no culture in this model, all sorts of things are left out. So it's very, very simple. Nevertheless, it's still really useful, right, as just sort of a benchmark to help us sort of think about what's going to cause a country to be successful or a country not to be successful. So there's a recent book out written by Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson called Why Nations Fail. And in this book, they look over hundreds of years why some countries have been successful and why other countries haven't been successful. What I want to do in this lecture is just take a couple of the main points that they make in that book and show how we can see them through the lens of this simple growth model, right? The simple growth model, the solo model, and the endogenous growth model, right? So we're going to use that as a lens to interpret some of the things that Robinson and Acemoglu get at, right, through their rich study of history. Okay, so again, let's think back to the case of Botswana and Zimbabwe, right? You see Botswana has done very, very well, but Zimbabwe hasn't. And one of the things we want to understand is why is that the case? What causes one country to be successful and another country not to be? Okay, well, here's what Acemoglu and Robinson say. The first one is growth requires a strong central government. And they find over history that this is true. Why is that true? Well, what's true in our model? In our model, we need people to make investments in machines. We also need people to make investments in innovation. If there's not a strong central government that's there to maintain property rights, to make sure that if I invest in these machines that nobody takes them, or if I invest in this technology that nobody copies it, that I get, at least for a short period of time, maybe some patent rights on it, then there's less incentive for people to innovate and less incentive for people to invest in machines. And as a result, what's going to happen is you're going to get low growth, right? Because what drives growth is, more physical capital and more innovations. But there's a catch. You can't have too strong of a central government. You can't have it be controlled by just a few people. Now, why is that? And this actually goes a long way to explaining the situation in Zimbabwe. If the government's controlled just by one or two people, then they often can't help themselves, right? So what they'll do is they'll extract resources. They'll say to people in different industries, you have to pay me money. And as they extract resources from the economy, that does two things. It means money's not going into investment, into new machines. It also means that there's less incentive to invest in new machines. So it's almost like the opposite effect of improving our technology, A, right? So remember when we increased A, by 3, we got an increase of a factor of 9. Well, if we decrease it by a factor of 3, we're going to get a decrease of a factor of 9. So if I'm siphoning money out of the economy to build myself palaces or to store money in gold or oil or something like that, I'm storing money, then what's going to happen is I'm going to hurt the economy doubly so, right? Because of the fact that I get this multiplier effect. So if we look at our formula, right, and we go through all that math, we see that it explains why that extraction would be so would be such a bad thing. And it also explains why we need a strong central government, because what drives growth is investments in machine and investments in innovation. There's another thing our model gives us, and this is sort of a subtlety, and it's not as pretty as everything and rosy as everything I've described so far. That is when A increases, labor becomes more productive, right? So we need less labor in order to produce the same output. And so if we think what happens in a real economy, suddenly we're getting a lot more stuff, but we may need less labor to produce that stuff. And so that labor eventually goes to producing more machines and more physical capital and more innovations, and we get more growth. But in the short run, right, when suddenly the machines are more productive, those workers don't have any place to go and we get unemployment. And that unemployment can be costly. So one of the things then that we learn sort of implicitly from the model is growth is going to require some creative destruction. Because what happens when we increase A? I made it all sound very nice. Like we just increase A and the coconut machines become twice as good. But actually when we increase A, we may wipe out an entire industry. So when we develop the tractor, right, all these horses, blacksmiths, farriers, all these people suddenly are no longer needed for jobs because they've been replaced by the tractor, right? So whole industries get wiped out and new industries come in. Now, Joseph Schumpeter was an economist who coined this term creative destruction. It's exactly what he's talking about. One technology replacing an old one. So let's see that, for example. So here's just the music industry. And what you see in this graph is different types of ways of listening to music. So what you see here in this blue line is vinyl records. And you see that that goes up and then goes down. Then you see cassette tapes go up and then go down. Then you see CDs go up and then go down. And then you see here digital, which has just been going up, up, up. So each one of these things, vinyl, cassette, CDs, all sort of had its day in the sun and then fell off as a new technology replaced it. Well, each time those new technologies replace the old technologies, all sorts of jobs get lost. Let me take a very specific example. So the American newspaper industry has been hurt horribly in the last decade or so because of people placing classified ads online. In particular, there's one company called Craigslist where you can post things for sale that has really hurt the newspaper industry. So if you look at revenue for Craigslist and newspaper ads, you see that Craigslist is going up, right, like this, and you see that newspaper ad sales are going down, right, as people move things from newspapers to Craigslist. Now you can think of this as an innovation, and it is an innovation, right, because it's much more efficient to post things online. You can pull the ad down as soon as it sells. You can put a lot more information on there. You're not restricted to small amounts of space. It's just a much better way to advertise things. You can put pictures. It's cheaper. Everybody sort of wins. Well, everybody wins except for the newspaper industry. So if you look at the number of workers employed in the newspaper industry, you see that from 1988 to 2009, it's fallen by almost 250,000 workers. It's 250,000 workers. Now you could say, well, yeah, but those workers all went to work at Craigslist. Well, not so. So here's a list of the 10 biggest websites and the number of employees that they've got. And if you look, Yahoo has 10,000 employees, Time Warner has 90,000 employees, Microsoft has 70,000 employees. Well, here's Craigslist, which is 7th. It has 23 employees. 23. So with only 23 employees, they're able to wipe out, in a sense, 250,000 jobs. It wasn't them alone, right, but this technology wiped out all those jobs. The reason Craigslist only needs 23 employees is when you place the ad, you type it in yourself. You don't need anyone from Craigslist to, typeset it and put it in the paper and lay it out and all that sort of stuff, right? They're also not selling any advertising. So the thing is, they don't have all these advertising sales. So 23 jobs, in effect, wiped out 250,000 jobs. That's what's called creative destruction. Something gets created, a great new website, a great new way to advertise your stuff for sale, but something also gets destroyed, which are a lot of jobs. Let's step back a second and think of this government that's being controlled by a few. Suppose you have a country where the newspaper industry had a lot of power in the government. Well, the newspaper industry might have said, hey, look, we shouldn't allow classified ads on the web, because they could have looked down the game tree, right, and said, hey, look, if they come in, we're going to lose 250,000 jobs. Now you could say, well, why would the government, stop Craigslist from coming into play just to help these newspaper people? Well, two reasons. One, it saves 250,000 jobs, so that's a compelling case. And two, they might be captured by the newspaper industry. So if the newspaper industry had captured the government, if the government was controlled by a select few, and those select few were in the newspaper industry, they might prevent this from happening. And you could say, well, that's a good thing because it saved all those jobs. But it's a bad thing because it lowered productivity. And so growth requires this creative destruction with new technologies replacing old, right? It requires going from vinyl to cassette to CD to digital music. It's that growth, right, these new technologies that make us all better off. But unfortunately, you've got to break a few eggs, and in this case, a lot of eggs within the newspaper industry. Okay, let's talk about the fertility of this model, right? Because we've talked about this only in the context of economic growth. Can we apply it in other cases? Well, we probably can't apply it to things like the growth of a tree or growth of a person, even though trees get to a maximal size and people get to a maximal size. But what we can do is we can apply it to things like our own production, our own sort of personal GDP. Because what does it tell us? It tells us that we can sort of work hard, but if we don't invest in new technologies and new innovation, if we don't become sort of better at what we do by possibly learning new models, learning new techniques, right, developing new skills, we're probably going to level out. And if you actually look at the data on what makes for really successful people who are very successful in their careers, one thing you find is they continue to learn. So it's almost like their own personal their own personal technology parameter, they keep upping and upping and upping. So what this model tells us that we can apply in other contexts is that continued growth depends on innovation, on getting better. You can't just sort of do more. At some point, the rate at which things fall off and the rate at which things increase are just going to even out. And that sustained growth requires innovation, becoming better at what you do. So just like countries have to invest in innovation, so should a person. And that's where personal growth and sort of personal success can come from. Okay, sum the whole thing up. So we've looked at these growth models and what have we seen? We've learned some really cool stuff like the rule of 72. That growth rates are very important because if you go from a growth rate from 2% to 6%, it means you double every 12 years as opposed to every 36 years, which is a huge difference. We also learned that absent innovation, growth tails off, right? It just stops. So we need a constant driver of innovation. And then we also saw sort of in this last lecture that that's not so easy. It may be easy to say, well, all we need is innovation. Well, to maintain that innovation, you need secure property rights. You need people to have incentives to invest in things like machine and also invest in new technologies. And so to get that, you need a strong central government. But the central government can't be so strong that it starts extracting stuff. Because if it extracts stuff, that is essentially the same effect as lowering the technology. And at the third, that government can't necessarily protect industries. Now, sometimes it can. There's cases where it's going to make sense to protect industries. But one of the things that's going to drive growth through innovation is this process of creative destruction. So the model tells us that sometimes we may have to, throw out our vinyl records and move to cassettes, and then throw out those cassettes and move to CDs, and then throw out those CDs and just listen to digital music. There's going to be these processes of creative destruction that drive the growth, and they're representative of innovation that makes us all better off. Okay, thank you.